Welcome back to The Rustic Wife. I'm Alana. So I'm just heading out to the garden to pick some sweet corn, and I thought I'd bring you along and show you a couple of tips on how you can tell if your sweet corn is ready to be picked. So I'm in the corn patch here, and I just wanted to show you. Generally there'll be about 1 or 2 ears of corn per plant, and the ones that ripen the fastest are the ones at the top. So a big indicator, other than the size of the cob, is the silk. Now this cob is tiny, and I can tell that the silk it's kind of damp and it's not dried out at all. So that's nowhere near ready to be picked. Here's an ear of corn here where it looks perfect, looks ready to roll, but it's not quite dry right to the tip there. And this feels not as dry as I'd like it to be. So I'm going to leave that for another day or two. So here is one that is ready. I can see it's filled out nicely, and I can look at that silk, and it's very dry to the touch. Very dry to the touch, and dry all the way down to the tip of the ear of the corn. So this one can be picked. I'm going to open it up and I'll show you what that looks like on the inside. Here's my cob of corn here, and like I said, the silk is very dry. It's a nice size too. So I'm going to pull this back and show you the kernels. You hear Otis crying in the background. Those kernels there. As a rule of thumb, the first ear of corn is generally the one that is the best and looks much better. Example of the second ear of corn. I've already harvested the first ear a little while ago, but you can see the silk is dry. And if I'm feeling it, it's quite big there, but it actually stops growing there. Sometimes the second ear of corn is less favorable. It's inferior than the first one. It's still good, but it may not grow as big as the first ear that is higher up on the stalk. So I'm going to take this off and show you what this one looks like. It's still a beautiful cob of corn, but it just is kind of stunted right there. It doesn't have that tapered ear, but that doesn't matter to us. It's all the same, and it's going to be just as good. I just wanted to show you the difference between the first ear of corn and the second. So you can see the first ear, it's a lovely full-size cob of corn, and it kind of goes and tapers into that traditional corn shape. The second one looks mature and lovely, but it's actually stunted. So you really have to have favorable conditions to have 2 ears of corn that look perfect. The second one is generally inferior to the first ear, and again, the first ear of corn that's higher on the plant will mature before the second one. We're going to eat that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just probably not something that they would sell in a grocery store. Another tip that you can tell if it's ripe or not, if you're still unsure at this point, you can take your thumbnail or your fingernail and poke a kernel. If a milky like sap comes out, then it's ripe. If it's really watery, then it may not be ripe, but I can tell this is. Just a tip about planting your corn for good germination. If you don't have enough space to plant several rows of corn, and you only have enough space to do one, instead of doing it in a row, it's best to plant it in a little block, or a cluster, since corn is actually generally wind pollinated. So if you're looking at the corn plant itself, this right here, these are called the tassels. The very top of the corn plant, this is the male part of the plant. Actually, this is a better one to show you. This is a young corn plant compared to the rest of them. Most of my plants, the corn is actually ready to harvest, but here's one here that's young. You see these little things right here, these little bits right here that are hanging down? Those are the anthers, and that contains the pollen. So if you look down here, here's a young cob right there, and before that's formed, there's actually just like these little side shoots, which is the female. Here's one right here. which is the female parts. And right here is the silk. Before the silk is actually out, that is what the shoot looks like. And then eventually the silk will emerge from the little side shoot, and that is what the pollen lands on, and each one of these little pieces of silk is responsible for creating a single kernel of corn on each cob. So one strand will make one kernel. Here's a better shot. This is where the silk emerges from the little shoot, and you can see right there, there's those little tassels which would have contained the pollen, and that is what pollinated the silk. So that's why it's better to plant them in a block, and then the wind can actually blow that pollen. It's really, really light. The wind can actually blow the pollen all over and coat all the strands of silk to create the kernels on the cobs. And bees will also actually pollinate, but what they do is they will actually land on the tassels, and they want to get the pollen. So they'll land on the tassels, and when they land, little puffs of pollen will come out. So that's how they would do it. They don't actually carry the pollen down to the silk. This variety of sweet corn that we grow, we've grown it for a couple of years now, and we have never been disappointed. It's a beautiful bicolor corn, and it is called Luscious, and it is 75 days to maturity, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's so sweet, you could actually eat it raw. It's really, really nice. So there's a few tips to help you figure out if your corn is ready to harvest or not. And I'm just gonna head up to the house and I'm gonna start preparing the corn to freeze it. Got a long winter, and it's nice to have our own food to eat all winter long. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you again next time.